The official countdown has begun. We're just days away from what promises to be an explosive 5 days of testimony from KZN Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi at the Madlanga Commission. Among the bombshell claims Mkhwanazi dropped in that now infamous July 6 briefing was how dockets still under investigation were pulled from the political killings task team. Well, this week, a relative of former President Jacob Zuma was arrested in connection with the murder of an ANC councillor in Hawick. So clearly, work on those dockets is now moving again. Meanwhile, Deputy National Police Commissioner Shadrack Sibiya, the man Mkhwanazi accused of removing those dockets, lost his bid to return to work. And the man who set up this inquiry, President Cyril Ramaphosa, was in Parliament answering questions on foreign policy. But he seems to have talked himself into a corner at home, struggling to justify why South Africa has so many deputy ministers. All this in the same week, the Constitutional Court ruled that husbands can now take their wives' surnames. Maybe there's a Mr. Ngcobo out there for me. I'm just kidding. But I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and this is a look at your week in politics. The Madlanga Commission has confirmed that KZN Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi will be its first witness when it kicks off next Wednesday. The man who set tongues wagging with that unprecedented July 6 briefing will now take the nation into his confidence about the alleged existence of a sophisticated criminal syndicate said to have infiltrated law enforcement and intelligence structures. On Monday, the Commission held a briefing to assure the public that it now has the ICT systems needed for the inquiry, including a cybersecurity solution, a secure internet connection, and a live streaming service. And when it comes to the 121 dockets that have now been returned to the KZN Political Killings Task Team, the Commission says its fact-finding mission won't be affected.
There was no need for us to have original copies of the dockets, but that also that the Commission and the team had taken the necessary steps to ensure the integrity of the information.
The Commission has also made it clear that not all submissions will be made public.
Some of the evidence we gather will include evidence from undercover agents who have been placed in criminal syndicates by the SAPS and who the SAPS use in their attempts to break these criminal syndicates. Now, if the identity of those people is disclosed, there is a very real risk that they will be killed.
An interim report is expected on President Cyril Ramaphosa's desk by the 17th of December, with the final one hopefully ready by March next year. That said, the Commission hasn't ruled out the possibility of requesting an extension, at least though that ball will be rolling. Meanwhile, some members of Parliament's ad hoc committee looking into the same allegations Mkhwanazi raised aren't thrilled that he'll be appearing before the Commission first. The committee had tried to get the KZN police chief to appear back in early September and came up short, but they want him first too. I suppose there's a little more pressure on the ad hoc committee, which must present its report to the National Assembly by the 31st of October.
We agreed that General Mkhwanazi must be the first witness on our list, and at the time we made contact with him, we found that he was already at the commission. Unfortunately, he can't divide himself into two halves. One half that will be with the commission and the other half with us. It's a dilemma that he found himself in.
But the EFF is having none of it.
So the situation of him having to split himself into two does not arise. It's just simply a juniorizing of the ad hoc committee, which is established by Parliament, making it a secondary platform where there's even claims that it will be given affidavits which are already submitted to the Commission of Inquiry, rendering the ad hoc committee as subordinate to whatever the executive has established. And that is what we are opposing as the EFF. And the EFF has therefore called for General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi to be subpoenaed. This unfortunately did not gain traction in the ad hoc committee. And we've been made to understand that the ad hoc committee then will wait for him to conclude his contributions there, because it is essential that he begins his testimony. Rather that the ad hoc committee begins testimony with him and does not come back to him in retrospect, otherwise it defeats the purpose.
The ad hoc committee has identified at least 8 witnesses to appear before it. On Tuesday, they added former Police Minister Bheki Cele to the list. Others include National Commissioner Fani Masemola, Cele's successor Senzo Mchunu, current Minister Feroz Khachalia, Deputy Ministers Kasil Matale and Poli Boshielo, and Deputy National Police Commissioner Shadrack Sibiya. Chances are the Madlanga Commission will call the same witnesses. And speaking of Sibiya, he lost his court bid to overturn his boss's decision to keep him at home back in July. Newzroom Africa's politics reporter Zolega Kodashe has those details.
The Deputy National Police Commissioner, Shadrack Sibiya's application was in 2 parts, if you remember. One part was that the decision by his superior, Fani Masemola, to place him on leave of absence or give him that stay-at-home order be invalidated. And 2, that the further disciplinary processes that would unfold against him be interdicted. So that was in 2 parts. And so the court, the full bench of the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, finding that it agrees with the submissions made by Masemola's legal counsel, that in fact the decision to place the Deputy National Police Commissioner was indeed rational and in light of the allegations that were leveled against him, particularly in that timeline of events. You'll remember that Masemola says that Sibiya essentially defied an instruction that there be a phasing out of this political killings task team, and thereby going against the orders of his superior. And so in light of that, that decision was lawful, also saying that they disagree with the contention that was made by Sibiya's legal counsel, that in fact this entire process was tainted by unlawfulness. And so that is the basis, the gist upon which the High Court found in favor of Masemola.
Meanwhile, in another court, Dumisani Khumalo, the man who was heading up the KZN political killings task team, was seeking to have his bail conditions relaxed. Khumalo and 3 other intelligence officers arrested back in June argue that being away from their posts is hindering the operations they were involved in. On Monday, a supplementary affidavit from National Police Commissioner Fani Masemola was accepted by the Pretoria Magistrates Court to bolster their bid. Masemola's statement says an internal SAPS probe has concluded, clearing the officers of any wrongdoing and that they should return to work. But the state read a counter-affidavit from investigating officer Brian Padiachi, who calls it suspicious that Masemola reached this conclusion without ever speaking to him about the probe. That prompted the court to grant the state's application for a postponement, giving them time to clear up the inconsistencies in Padiachi and Masemola's affidavits.
There's a clear difference between contradiction and paradox. I'm not particularly keen to use the word contradiction. I would rather use paradox. So based on that, it is only fair that the prosecution is granted the clarity it's granted the postponement to clarify this. The advantages are quite enormous. It might that which they might be achieved by this postponement might even cause the whole of this matter to collapse. It might even cause this whole matter to stand. Either way.
Accused number 7, Dineo Mukwele, at the center of this HR storm after allegedly being appointed without the necessary top security clearance or qualifications, has abandoned her bid to amend her terms as she's now involved in an internal SAPS process. While Khumalo battles in court to return to heading the KZN political killings task team, work on the 121 dockets appears to be moving forward. This week, former President Jacob Zuma's nephew and traditional leader, Sibiya Zuma, was hit with a third murder charge. The 55-year-old chief of the uMngeni clan was already in custody for the killing of his relative, DA councillor Nhlanhla Ngcobo, who was gunned down outside his Howick home in 2023. Now, the latest charge involves ANC activist Nhlanhla allegedly killed for exposing illegal land sales in Emasoshen in Popomeni, also still in Howick, back in 2022. And the third victim, Nhlanhla Zuma, suffered the same fate, executed at close range outside his home.
The Honorable the President, you are welcome and welcome to the podium to answer the question too.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was answering questions in the National Assembly touching on foreign policy, insisting that South Africa will not bend the knee to the US and confirming that an ambassador will be appointed soon. Ramaphosa would not be drawn on why South Africa needs 42 deputy ministers who cost the fiscus 287 million rand in salaries, 135 million rand in travel, and even more on VIP protection and housing, despite holding no executive authority. The question came from Action SA's Athol Trollip, who asked whether Cabinet intends to approve a constitutional amendment bill to abolish these roles. Ramaphosa's defense, the government of national unity.
I think please have the bill forwarded so that we look at it. I'm not able to respond in any way whatsoever until I see the contents of the bill. Now, therefore, much as I said, it sounds like a threat. It isn't a threat. No, I want to actually compliment you and say, I don't see it as a threat. I see it as a very meaningful contribution because you are concerned, as I am, of the size of our executive. And the size of the executive we now have is a result of the outcome of our elections, where we had to put together a government of national unity with 10 political parties that sat down and negotiated the structure of the government we have. Now, whether we like it or not, it is what we have. Ideally, Honorable Trollip, I would want a much smaller executive. I would also like fewer deputy ministers. But right now, we do have deputy ministers who are really putting shoulder to the wheel, who are going even beyond what I would call the call of duty. And those deputy ministers are distinguishing themselves as real contributors to our governance. And what I also really am appreciating is the fact that many of our deputy ministers are working so well with their minister colleagues.
So this weekend, the ANC is hosting a special NEC meeting set to focus on local governance issues. So expect a roll call of all deployees in the sphere, followed by marching orders from the party's highest decision-making body. I can't help but wonder how much of the latest reports from the South African Human Rights Commission will make it into their discussions this weekend. The Chapter 9 institution has been highly critical of the country's local municipalities and their commitment or lack thereof to upholding basic human rights.
We cannot say that 30 years of democracy, we still have sewage running in the streets. So yes, the people's rights are being violated, and on a daily basis we engage municipalities. But you know, we do have a problem that municipalities are not adhering to their mandate. An elderly person said to me, "I'm eating my own waste."
It's been 10 years since the South African Human Rights Commission released its State of Human Rights report in the country, and the status quo appears to remain largely unchanged. The sphere of local government is vital in the realization of the fundamental human rights enshrined in the Constitution. As South Africans begin preparing for the municipal polls, the state of affairs remains dire on the ground.
Local government was another issue, and you saw that the highest number of complaints were in KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, and Rustenburg. Limpopo and Northwest, sorry for that.
However, the recommendations made by the Chapter 9 institution may lack teeth. Last year, the Supreme Court of Appeal ruled that the Commission's recommendations were not binding. But Section 184, subsection 2b of the Constitution stipulates that the Commission has the power to take steps to secure redress where human rights have been violated.
After the break, I'll tell you more about how South Africa plans to intensify its genocide case against Israel. President Ramaphosa also led a virtual BRICS Leaders Summit. And I wonder how many of you husbands and prospective husbands would be willing to take on the surname of your wives. Well, the Concord says you're more than welcome to. More on that and other stories coming up after this. Welcome back. You're still watching our roundup of the week that was on South Africa's political landscape. On Monday, President Cyril Ramaphosa chaired a virtual BRICS Leaders Summit reflecting on how countries are shifting from a unipolar order to a multipolar one. Some believe there's a new energy bubbling in the global south, especially after those images of Russia, China and India's leaders meeting in Tianjin. And while the chickens have not quite come home to roost, what's clear is that the trio's common adversary remains the United States. And with South Africa currently holding the G20 presidency, Ramaphosa also called for stronger coordination among BRICS nations, particularly around financing and trade.
Unilateral tariff actions are contributing to an increasingly protectionist environment, which poses great hardships and danger for the countries of the global south. The uncertainty of the new trading regime has already negatively affected employment levels in my own country, South Africa, and is an obstacle to our economic growth. We are therefore supportive of meaningful BRICS initiatives that improve the resilience of our economies as BRICS countries and those of the global south.
Ramaphosa also pointed to growing opportunities to reorder the global economy.
We need to pivot from crisis management to strategic action, from emergency fixes to collective growth and development. I strongly believe that when BRICS countries unite in solidarity to co-create solutions, we unlock tangible mutual benefits for BRICS members and the broader global south. For South Africa, a BRICS economic partnership strategy that contains a meaningful way forward on addressing the imbalanced structure of BRICS trade would send a clear message to the world that all BRICS members are committed to mutually beneficial trade that addresses the needs and interests of all its members.
International Relations and Cooperation Minister Ronald Lamola says South Africa has been vindicated in its bid to hold Israel accountable at the International Court of Justice. Addressing MPs in Cape Town, Lamola pointed to a growing global consensus that Jerusalem's war on Gaza is genocidal. He noted that while our country's case was initially dismissed in some quarters, Israel's continued actions have only confirmed its genocidal intent. Here's Newzroom Afrika's Kanita Hunter, who monitored those proceedings.
Our case was rejected in some quarters as populist, blood-libel, meritless and baseless. Today, as we meet here, there is a growing body of consensus on whether what all were witnessing is indeed consistent with the statements of the Israel leaders.
Despite the growing voices condemning Israel, Lamola says South Africa's warnings were ignored at first, with many insisting genocide was not possible.
This denial of the genocide and the atrocities by Israel and the tacit condemnation of these acts have led to the questioning: do some believe that Palestinians' lives matter less than others?
The committee heard that since instituting proceedings, famine has been confirmed in Gaza, with nearly the entire population of about 2 million people facing acute food insecurity.
Famine and the humanitarian crisis is not a side effect of war, that it was the intention. The actual humanitarian crisis was the intention of the military actions and the attacks on housing, hospitals, infrastructure.
Dango adds that Professor William Shabas, one of the world's leading experts on genocide, has described the ICJ case as arguably the strongest case of genocide ever brought before a court. But some MPs argue that the case is not in South Africa's interest.
So there is a financial cost. There is an economic cost. What have we inflicted upon the people of South Africa in the greater international trade system and in terms of the greater international political economy? And how are South Africans paying the price for this?
MPs from the ANC, EFF, Al-Jamaa and others countered that more action is needed to isolate Israel as the death toll in Gaza rises, famine persists, and much of the besieged territory becomes uninhabitable.
Israel must be isolated. There must be economic embargoes that are imposed, economic sanctions that are imposed on Israel. No one must trade with Israel as long as they continue to perpetuate the genocide in Palestine.
Pretoria says it is relying on the UN Security Council to act against Israel, which stands accused of impunity and total disregard for international law.
Trade, Industry and Competition Minister Parks Tau has backed down on draft regulations that would have seen students with loans for tertiary education listed at the Credit Bureau. In a statement on Thursday evening, the DTIC admitted the minister's decision was influenced by an overwhelming public response, with more than 20,000 submissions opposing the plan. Earlier this week, the ministry's spokesperson tried to clarify what the proposal was actually meant to achieve.
What we see is the particular clause that's been generating some public outcry has been Regulation 18, subsection 7, subsection E. This is a regulation that has been gazetted in 2006. So the first thing to clarify is that there's nothing new with respect to student debt in the new draft regulations. What is new is a phrase that has been inserted, which reads to include juristic persons within the ambit of the regulations. And what this does is bring in small and medium enterprises, particularly sole proprietors, into the ambit of the national credit regulations, thereby allowing for finance institutions to access a history of small and medium enterprises and allowing them to offer them lines of credit. So they have no additional bearing on student debt as it stands the current draft regulations.
By Thursday evening, the tone had completely shifted. The South African Union of Students welcomed the decision, calling the proposal anti-black and anti-poor.
We support all calls that seek to diminish student debt because we see student debt as one of the biggest barriers to young people in as far as opportunities are concerned. And of course, we have seen that, and I think it's a progressive move by the party because it speaks to what young people are looking for. It speaks of what young people are crying about every single day across campuses, that we have finished our degrees, but we cannot have our degrees because we've got historic debts and institutions are withholding. Moreover, what is more devastating is even students who are funded by NSFAS find themselves not having these degrees while they've finished their degrees. And when you ask NSFAS, it dilly-dallies around issues of funding.
And finally, the Constitutional Court has ruled that husbands can now take on their wives' surnames. The Apex Court found parts of the Births and Death Registration Act unlawful, saying some clauses were discriminatory on the basis of gender. So here's one of the two husbands who took the matter to court, explaining why they felt this was a just cause to bring before the judiciary.
It's now 3 years and 6 months after me and my wife got married, and a couple of months before we got married, we made the pledge to each other to say and to agree on the fact that we will be joining our surnames, so that it's not just me as a husband and her as a wife getting married, but it's also two families that's getting married. And I was thinking before we got married that my great-great-grandmother, what was her maiden surname? Somewhere it got lost. And I spoke to many people, and there's so many that they don't know, that they don't know the mother's side of the surname, and they are your ancestors. And so over and above the fact that it is two families and two people that's getting married, we are also our own family. And that was my main motivation behind that. And that was a pledge that I made to my wife.
Oh man, what a story. I have no doubt there'll be plenty of chatter about husbands taking on their wives' surnames for weeks to come. But that's where I'll leave it tonight. I can assure you that Newzroom Afrika should remain your go-to channel as we roll out lots of special plans just for you, our treasured viewers, especially in the lead up to the start of that Madlanga Commission. But for now though, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.